Airboy walks into the company and announces, "I am the new heir." Everyone laughs until the lawyer confirms he's telling the truth. The will, the videos, and the evidence leave no doubt. But what the last key hides could change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Liam held his mother's hand tightly as he stared at the immense building in front of him. He had never seen anything so tall, so imposing, so different from everything he knew. The mirrored glass walls reflected the New York sky, and he felt a tightness in his chest, thinking that somehow all of this was connected to him. His mother, Mary, squeezed his hand back, as if trying to transmit courage through that simple touch. She was nervous too, but she tried not to show it. They lived in a simple neighborhood in Queens, in a small apartment where every room had its story, every piece of furniture carried a memory. Liam grew up helping his mother with chores, studying at night under the yellow light of the kitchen, dreaming of a future that always seemed too distant to be real. Mary worked as a custodian at a public school, waking up before the sun rose and returning home when the moon was already high. She never complained. She never let exhaustion overcome the smile she saved for her son. But everything changed when the envelope arrived. It was a large, heavy envelope with the seal of a law firm in downtown Manhattan. Mary opened it with trembling hands, read the first few lines, and had to sit down. Liam saw tears streaming down his mother's face before he even understood what was happening. She pulled him close, held his face in both hands, and said, her voice thick with emotion, that they needed to talk about something very important. About someone very important. Mary then told him about Robert, about the man she loved when she was young, about the plans they made together, about the day he had to leave to build something bigger, something that separated them. She said that Robert promised to return, but life took them down different paths. When she found out she was pregnant, Mary tried to find him, but he was already immersed in a corporate world she was not a part of. Over time, she gave up. She raised Liam alone with dignity, never speaking ill of the father the boy had never met. Now, 11 years later, Robert had left this world. And before he passed, he had left everything documented. He left proof, documents, videos. He left the truth he had guarded for so long. Liam was his only son, the sole heir to everything he had built throughout his life. The lawyer's letter was clear, direct, almost cold in how it presented the facts. The boy had a legal right to the entire inheritance. And what's more, Robert had left strict instructions so that no one could contest or interfere with this right. Liam barely slept the night before the visit to the building. He kept thinking about the father he never knew, the man his mother described with so much affection and so much pain at the same time. He thought about what it would be like to step into the place where he worked, to breathe the same air, to touch the things he touched. He felt anger for not having had the chance to meet him, but he also felt a strange gratitude for knowing that in the end, his father had not forgotten them. Now, standing before that giant of concrete and glass, Liam took a deep breath. Mary straightened the collar of her son's shirt, ran a hand tenderly through his hair, and whispered that everything was okay, that they were together, that nothing bad would happen. She wore a simple but clean and well-kept dress. Liam wore the best clothes he had, a pair of dress pants his mother bought especially for that day, and a white shirt she had ironed with all the care in the world. They entered the lobby and were met by a security guard who looked them up and down with suspicion. Mary showed the lawyer's letter, and the man, still wary, made a few calls before letting them in. They took the elevator to the 12th floor where the main conference room was located. The doors opened to reveal a wide hallway with marble floors and paintings on the walls. Each step echoed, and Liam felt as if all eyes were on him, even though the hallway was empty. The secretary greeted them with a polite but distant smile. She asked them to wait a few minutes while she informed the directors. Liam sat in a leather armchair that was bigger than him, swinging his legs without his feet, touching the floor. Mary stood beside him, as if protecting her son from something invisible that hung in the air. When the conference room door opened, a man in an impeccable suit appeared and called them in. It was Dr. Henry, the lawyer responsible for Robert's estate. He had a serious but kind expression and greeted Mary and Liam with a firm handshake. Inside the room, there was a huge dark wood table, surrounded by leather chairs. Seated there were 6 men and 2 women, all dressed in formal attire, all with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disdain. In the center of the table, in a chair that looked like a throne, sat Morris. He was the vice president of the company, the man who had been running everything since Robert fell ill. He had graying hair, broad shoulders, and a gaze that pierced through people as if they were transparent. When he saw Liam and Mary enter, he didn't hide the ironic smirk that formed on his lips. Dr. Henry asked everyone to be seated and began to speak about the reason for that extraordinary meeting. He explained that according to Robert's will, there was a single legal beneficiary of the entire inheritance he had left behind. Some of those present began to shift in their chairs, exchanging confused glances. Morris crossed his arms and tilted his head as if he were about to hear a joke. It was then that Dr. Henry pointed to Liam and said, in a clear and unhesitating voice, that this 11-year-old boy was Robert's son and the sole heir to everything he had built. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved, no one breathed. And then, as if someone had given a signal, the laughter began. Quiet at first, then louder, more mocking. Morris was the first to laugh, with a guffaw that echoed through the entire room. He stood up, placed his hands on the table, and looked at Dr. Henry as if he were facing a madman. He asked if this was a joke, if they were all there wasting their time on a ridiculous charade. He said he would not accept Robert's memory being tarnished by such a farce, by such a poorly crafted scam. The other directors began to agree, some shaking their heads, others making comments in low voices. Liam felt his face grow hot, not with shame but with indignation. He looked at his mother, who remained calm, poised, her eyes fixed on Morris. Dr. Henry, unfazed, opened a leather briefcase and began to take out documents. He placed them on the table, one by one, while explaining what each paper meant. DNA tests performed when Liam was still a baby, letters written by Robert, old photographs of Mary and Robert together, records of contact attempts that had been blocked over the years. Morris tried to interrupt several times, but Dr. Henry raised his hand and asked him to wait. Then he took out a USB drive and connected it to the room's projector. The screen lit up, and suddenly Robert's face appeared. He was sitting in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines, but his eyes shone with a determination that seemed to defy his body's fragility. The entire room fell silent. Robert began to speak. He said he knew this would be the last video he would record, that his days were coming to an end, and that there was something he needed to do before he left. He spoke about Mary, about the love he felt for her, about the mistakes he made by leaving her behind. He spoke about the day he learned of Liam's existence, about how he tried to get closer, but was prevented by people who wanted to control his life and his decisions. With his voice trembling with emotion, Robert declared that everything he built belonged to Liam. Every building, every contract, every share of the company. He said he knew there would be attempts to contest, to sabotage, to take from the boy what was his by right. But he had prepared. He had registered everything with a notary, had made digital certifications, and had left. Protected copies in 3 different law firms. No one could change it. No one could steal his son's future. Tears streamed down Mary's face as she watched the video. Liam was crying too, but silently, without taking his eyes off the screen. It was the first time he had seen his father, the first time he had heard his voice, and even without ever having met, he felt a deep connection, as if Robert were there, in that room, holding his hand. When the video ended, the silence returned. But it was a different silence, not of mockery, but of shock. Morris was pale, his fists clenched on the table. The other directors looked at each other, not knowing what to say. One of the women present discreetly wiped away a tear that escaped from the corner of her eye. Dr. Henry spoke again. He read aloud the terms of the will, which had been updated 3 days before Robert left this world. Everything was registered, authenticated, and legally protected. Liam was the sole beneficiary. The company, the properties, the bank accounts, the investments. Everything now belonged to him. And until he turned 18, Mary would be the legal guardian. responsible for managing the assets on her son's behalf. Morris exploded. He shot up from his chair with such force that it nearly toppled backward. He said this was absurd, that he had dedicated years of his life alongside Robert, that he had built this company with him, that he deserved something in return for all he had done. Dr. Henry, without changing his tone, replied that Morris would receive what was in his contract as an employee, but that inheritance was not a matter of merit or dedication, it was a matter of family ties, and Robert's only family. Tie was with Liam. One of the older directors, a man with white hair and a tired look, raised his hand and asked to speak. He said that, although it was difficult to accept this situation, they needed to respect Robert's wishes. He said he had known the founder since the company's early days and knew he was a man of his word, a man who thought deeply before making decisions. If Robert chose to do it this way, there was a reason, and they, as professionals, should honor that. Gradually others began to agree, not all of them, but enough to ease the tension in the room a little. Morris, however, did not give up. He turned to Liam, looked at the boy with contempt, and said that a child had no ability to run anything, that this would all fall apart in a matter of months. Liam, for the first time, spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. He said he wasn't there to run anything. He said he was there because his father, a man he never had the chance to meet, wanted him to know the truth. He said that all he wanted was to understand who Robert was, what he built, and why he made that decision. Liam asked for only one thing: respect. Respect for his father's memory, respect for the mother who raised him alone, and respect for him who was trying to deal with something much bigger than he could understand. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of reflection. The woman who had wiped away a tear stood up and approached Liam. She was the Director of Human Resources, a lady in her 50s with a kind smile. She said she was sorry for how they had been received, that she understood how frightening all of this must be for an 11-year-old boy. She extended her hand, and Liam shook it, feeling for the first time since entering that room that perhaps he wasn't completely alone. Dr. Henry then informed them that there were other matters to be dealt with, but that this meeting served primarily to formalize Liam's presence as the legal heir. He said that in the coming days they would have to sign documents, file registrations, and begin organizing the transition. But for now the important thing was that everyone there acknowledged Liam's right. And one by one, though some with reluctance, they all signed a document attesting that they were aware of the situation. Morris was the last to sign. He gripped the pen so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wrote his name with sharp, jerky movements, nearly tearing the paper. Then he threw the pen on the table and left the room without a word. The door slammed shut behind him, and everyone felt the weight of that gesture. Liam and Mary left the conference room with Dr. Henry by their side. He said that had been the hardest part, but that now the path was clear. He handed Mary a key, a golden old-fashioned key, and said that Robert had left specific instructions for Liam to use it when he was ready. The key opened a safe in Robert's personal office on the top floor of the building. Inside there was something his father wanted his son to find. As they walked back to the elevator, Liam looked out the window and saw the city stretching as far as the eye could see. New York was gigantic, chaotic, full of lives that intersected without ever truly touching. He thought about how many people down there had stories similar to his, secrets kept, bonds broken, truths hidden. And for the first time since it all began, he felt that maybe he was in the right place, even if he didn't know exactly what to do yet. Mary placed a hand on her son's shoulder and smiled. She said she was proud of him, of how he had behaved, of the courage he had shown. Liam leaned his head on his mother's arm and closed his eyes for a moment. He knew this was just the beginning. He knew there would be more challenges, more people trying to discredit him, more secrets to be revealed. But as long as he had his mother by his side, he believed he could face anything. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious apartment overlooking Central Park, Morris stared out the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He couldn't accept this. He couldn't just let some kid take what was his by right. Robert may have been the founder, but it was he, Morris, who kept the company afloat during the illness. It was he who made the tough decisions, who faced the competitors, who ensured the profits kept growing. He picked up his phone and made a call. On the other end, a male voice answered. Morris said only one sentence before hanging up. He said they needed to talk about the new heir, and there was no time to lose. Someone needed to make that boy understand that there are games children can't win, and Morris was willing to play hardball to get back what he believed was his. As night fell over New York, Liam was at home sitting on the small balcony of their apartment. He held the golden key Dr. Henry had given his mother. It was heavy, cold, and had Robert's initials engraved on the top. He ran his finger over the letters, feeling every curve, every line. It was as if his father were there, in that small piece of metal, waiting to tell his story. Mary brought a cup of tea and sat next to her son. They remained in silence, watching the city lights turn on one by one. Liam thought about everything his father said in the video, every word, every look. And then, for the first time, he felt something beyond sadness and confusion. He felt a responsibility to honor that legacy, not for the money or the power, but for the people Robert left behind, for the people who now depended on him. Tomorrow, they would return to the building. Liam would go up to the top floor, open the safe, and discover what his father had kept for him. And although he was still just an 11-year-old boy, raised simply by his mother, he knew he was about to take a step that would change his life forever. A step toward a future that frightened him, but also called to him with a force impossible to ignore. The morning brought a mix of anxiety and curiosity that didn't let Liam sleep well. He woke up before the alarm went off, stared at his bedroom ceiling, and thought about what he would find in that office. The golden key was on his nightstand, and he picked it up before even getting out of bed, feeling the cold weight of the metal against his palm. Mary was already awake, preparing breakfast in the small kitchen. She made pancakes, Liam's favorite, as if trying to give him a bit of comfort before facing another difficult day. They ate breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Mary looked at her son with a tenderness mixed with concern. She knew that this day would mark Liam in a profound way, that he was about to enter a world not made for children. But she also knew she couldn't protect him from everything, that some things had to be experienced, even if they hurt. When they arrived at the building, the reception was different. The security guard, who had previously looked at them with suspicion now, greeted them politely. The secretary smiled more genuinely and offered them coffee while they waited for Dr. Henry. It seemed the news had spread quickly through the corridors, and everyone now knew who this 11-year-old boy was who carried the last name Smith, the same name engraved in golden letters on the building's facade. Dr. Henry appeared a few minutes later with a briefcase under his arm and a lighter expression than the day before. He greeted Mary and Liam and said it was time for them to see the most important place in the entire building. They entered the elevator, and Dr. Henry pressed the button for the 25th floor, the top one. As they ascended, he explained that this floor was exclusively Robert's, that he spent long hours there, thinking, planning, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway different from the others. It was quieter, more private, with a sober but elegant decor. There was only one door at the end of the hall, a solid wood door with a discreet plaque that simply read Robert Smith. Dr. Henry handed the key to Liam and stepped back as if this moment belonged only to the boy. Liam looked at his mother, who nodded, encouraging him. He approached the door, put the key in the lock, and turned it slowly. The sound of the latch opening echoed in the silent hallway. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was spacious but not ostentatious. There was a dark wood desk in the center, surrounded by shelves filled with books. The walls had a few framed photographs, images of the company in different phases, of buildings under construction, of teams gathered in celebration. But what caught Liam's attention the most was the view. An entire wall was made of glass, offering a panoramic view of New York City. From up there, the city seemed even bigger, more alive, more full of possibilities. Liam walked slowly to the desk and ran his hand over the smooth wood surface. There were a few objects organized there: an old fountain pen, a picture frame turned face down, a closed leather-bound planner. He turned the picture frame over, and his heart leaped. It was a photo of Mary, still young, smiling at the camera. She was wearing a simple floral dress and sitting on a park bench. Liam looked at his mother, who had entered right behind him and now had tears in her eyes. She said nothing, just placed her hand on her son's shoulder and looked at the photo with an expression that mixed longing and pain. Dr. Henry pointed to a side wall where there was a wooden panel that looked different from the others. He said that was where the safe Robert had mentioned was located. Liam approached and saw a small numerical keypad next to a lock. Dr. Henry handed him a piece of paper with a sequence of numbers and explained that was the combination. Liam typed the numbers slowly, one by one. When he finished, he heard a click, and the panel slid to the side, revealing a steel safe. He inserted the same golden key into the safe's lock and turned it. The heavy door swung open with a low creak. Inside there was a polished wooden box the size of a shoebox. Liam carefully picked it up and placed it on the desk. Mary and Dr. Henry stood beside him, watching in silence. Liam opened the box. Inside, on a dark blue velvet cloth, was a watch. It wasn't an expensive or luxurious watch, but a simple wristwatch with a leather strap worn by time. Liam picked it up and saw that it had stopped, the hands pointing exactly to 3:22. Underneath the watch was a folded piece of paper. He opened it with trembling hands and began to read. The handwriting was firm but filled with emotion. Robert wrote about the watch, saying it was the only object of sentimental value he owned. It was a gift from his own mother on the day he opened his first office. She told him that every second was important. That time did not turn back and that he needed to use every minute wisely. Robert wore that watch every day for all the years he built his empire. And now he wanted Liam to have it. He wanted his son to understand that if his time had ended, his son's time was just beginning. He also wrote that he didn't expect to be forgiven, that he knew he had made a mistake by walking away, by letting fear and pride speak louder than love. But he hoped that Liam would find in that watch a symbol of continuity, that he would understand that life was made of choices and that some choices haunt us forever, but that it was also made of second chances, of new beginnings, of opportunities to do things differently. Tears streamed down Liam's face as he finished reading the letter. Mary cried beside him, hugging her son tightly. Dr. Henry, a man accustomed to dealing with estates, wills, and cold documents, discreetly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Liam put the watch on his wrist. It was too big for the boy's thin arm, and the strap was loose, but he didn't care. It was as if he were carrying a piece of his father with him, as if somehow Robert were there guiding his steps. After a few moments of silence, Dr. Henry said, there was one more thing Robert wanted Liam to do. He wanted his son to get to know the company from the inside, to see the departments, to talk to the people who worked there. Robert believed that a company wasn't just numbers and contracts, but lives, stories, and intertwined dreams. And he wanted Liam to understand this before making any decisions about the future. They went down to the 10th floor where the administrative department was located. Liam saw dozens of people working in cubicles, typing on computers, answering phones, organizing documents. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with sympathy. A woman in her 30s approached and introduced herself as Julia, an accounting assistant. She said she had worked directly with Robert for the last 2 years and that he was a fair boss, demanding, but one who always listened to people. Liam asked if she liked working there, and Julia hesitated before answering. She said yes, the work was good, but sometimes it was difficult. She had a young son at home, and balancing her schedule was complicated. She shared that Robert, upon learning of her situation, had allowed her to leave early twice a week to pick up her son from school. It was a simple gesture, but it made all the difference in her life. Liam listened attentively, absorbing every word. He didn't know that small gestures could have such big impacts, that a boss could be more than someone who gave orders, but someone who saw people as human beings with their difficulties and needs. They visited the operations department, where people dealt with logistics, transportation, and suppliers. There Liam met Mr. Anthony, a white-haired man who had been with the company for over 20 years. He told stories about Robert, about how he was demanding but fair, about how he treated everyone with respect, from the directors to the cleaning staff. Mr. Anthony said that when he fell ill a few years ago, Robert personally called him, asked how he was, and offered to help with medical costs. He said he would never forget that Robert wasn't perfect, but he was human. As he walked through the halls, Liam began to understand what his father meant in the letter. A company wasn't a building, it was people. People who woke up early, who faced traffic, who left children at home, who carried worries and dreams. People who trusted that, at the end of the month, they would have a salary to pay the bills, to put food on the table, to give their children a better future. They reached the customer service department on the 8th floor. There, Liam saw young people answering calls, solving problems, dealing with complaints. He noticed the fatigue on some faces, the tension in their shoulders, the way some hung up the phone and took a deep breath before taking the next call. A young woman in her early 20s was sitting in a chair, her hand on her forehead, clearly exhausted. Liam approached and asked if she was okay. The young woman, who introduced herself as Camilla, smiled wearily and said yes, it was just the end of a long shift. She said she studied at night and worked during the day, that she was finishing her degree in business administration and dreamed of growing within the company. Liam asked if she thought that was possible, and Camilla said yes, that Robert had always encouraged employees to study and develop themselves. But she also admitted that, with Morris in charge, things were changing. He was stricter, more distant, and didn't seem to care much about people's individual stories. Liam felt a tightness in his chest. He was beginning to understand the weight of the responsibility he carried. It wasn't just about him or his mother. It was about Julia and her young son. It was about Mr. Anthony and his gratitude. It was about Camilla and her dreams. It was about all those people who depended on that company to live, to build their futures. When they returned to Robert's office on the top floor, Liam stood in front of the window, looking out at the city. Mary came and stood beside him. She said she knew this was all a lot for an 11-year-old boy to carry, but that she would always be there to help him. Liam looked at his mother and said that he now understood why his father chose him. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about power. It was about giving him a chance to do things differently, to build something that truly mattered. That night, when they returned home, Liam took an old notebook he used for schoolwork and began to write. He made a list of things he wanted to change when he was old enough to make decisions. He wanted to create a space in the company for employees' children, a place where they could stay while their parents worked. He wanted to offer more flexible hours for those who needed it. He wanted people to feel seen, heard, respected. Mary looked over her son's shoulder and smiled. She said Robert would be proud, that he always believed true success wasn't in how much money one accumulated, but in how many lives one touched in a positive way. Liam closed the notebook and looked at the watch on his wrist. It was still stopped, but he decided he wouldn't wind it. He would leave it like that as a reminder that although his father's time had stopped, his was moving forward, and he would make every second count. The next day, Liam and Mary returned to the building for more meetings with Dr. Henry. There were documents to sign, processes to initiate, legal matters to resolve. But in the middle of the afternoon, an interruption changed the course of the day. The secretary rushed into the room and said there was a man in reception claiming to have a right to part of the inheritance. He said he was Robert's former partner and demanded an immediate meeting. Dr. Henry frowned and asked for the man to be taken to a smaller meeting room. Liam, Mary, and the lawyer went down there and found a man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive but worn suit, with an arrogant expression on his face. He introduced himself as Roderick, said he was Robert's partner in the early years of the company, and that he had a right to a share of what was built. Dr. Henry asked him to present documents to prove this claim. Roderick pulled a series of papers from his briefcase, old contracts, receipts, photographs. He said he invested money at the beginning, that he helped build the company, and that Robert betrayed him by pushing him out years ago. He said he deserved compensation, that he deserved justice. Dr. Henry examined the documents carefully. He asked for a few minutes to verify the information and left the room with the paperwork. Liam stayed there looking at Roderick, who was now trying to intimidate him with his gaze. The man leaned forward and said, in a low but threatening tone, that this was no place for children, that he should go back to school and let the adults handle adult business. Liam's heart raced, but he didn't look away. He replied in a firm voice that he was there because it was his right, because his father wanted it that way. Roderick laughed, a dry, humorless laugh, and said that Robert was weak, that he made sentimental decisions that would end up destroying everything he built. He said that giving everything to a kid was the biggest proof of that. Just then, Dr. Henry returned, accompanied by a company technician carrying a laptop. The lawyer said he needed to show everyone something. He connected the laptop to the room's projector and opened a video file. It was another video of Robert, recorded around the same time as the first, but with a different purpose. Robert was sitting on the hospital bed, but this time his expression was more serious, almost severe. He began to talk about Roderick. He said that he was indeed his partner in the early years, but that the partnership was dissolved legally and fairly more than 15 years ago. Robert paid Roderick's share as agreed in the contract, and both signed a document ending any financial or business ties between them. But Robert revealed something more. He said that during his last hospital stay, Roderick tried to visit him several times, not out of concern, but to try to convince him to change his will. He brought fake documents claiming he had never received payment for the dissolution of the partnership. He tried to manipulate the situation, taking advantage of a moment of weakness. But Robert, even while ill, saw through the farce. And before ending the video, he showed the camera a series of receipts, bank statements and signed contracts, all protected with digital certification, proving that Roderick had been paid in full and had no right to anything. Roderick's face turned pale. He tried to argue, said it was a lie, that Robert was confused when he recorded that video. But Dr. Henry interrupted, showing the authenticated documents, the notarized receipts, the bank statements that proved the transfers. There was no way to contest it. Roderick had no right to anything, and what's more, by presenting false documents, he could face legal consequences for his actions. Roderick shot up from his chair, red with anger and humiliation. He looked at Liam with hatred and said this wasn't over, that he would find a way to prove he deserved something. But before he could continue, 2 security guards entered the room, called by Dr. Henry. They escorted Roderick out of the building as he shouted threats and empty accusations. When the room fell silent, again Liam felt his legs grow weak. He hadn't expected things to be so intense, so full of conflict. Mary hugged him, whispering that it was okay, that the truth always prevails. Dr. Henry placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said he had done very well, that he had more courage than many adults he knew. That night, Liam could barely eat. He kept thinking about everything he had experienced in the last few days. He thought about the people he met, the stories he heard, the challenges he faced. He was still an 11-year-old boy. He still liked to play soccer in the street with his friends. He still had to do his homework. But now he was also the heir to an empire, the guardian of a legacy, the one responsible for hundreds of lives that depended on that immense building in downtown New York. Before going to sleep, he looked once more at the watch on his wrist. The hands were still stopped, marking 3:22, and he wondered if he would be able to live up to what his father expected of him. If he could honor that legacy, protect those people, make the right choices. He didn't have the answers. But he had something no one could take from him. He had the certainty that, as long as he was breathing, he would do the best he could, and that somehow, that would be enough. The following days were a mixture of intense learning and conflicting emotions. Liam started visiting the company building almost every day, always accompanied by his mother and guided by Dr. Henry. He attended meetings without fully understanding the technical terms, but paying attention to people's body language, the exchanged glances, the significant pauses. He began to realize that behind the numbers and graphs there were always people, decisions that affected real lives. Mary, for her part, was learning to navigate this new world. She spoke with the lawyers, asked questions about legal processes, about asset management. She discovered she had a natural talent for organization and for seeing details others missed. Dr. Henry began to respect her not just as Liam's mother, but as an intelligent and capable woman who could be a valuable ally in the transition. It was during one of these meetings that Liam asked a question that surprised everyone. He asked how much it would cost to create a space within the company dedicated to employees' children. A place where children could stay while their parents worked, with educational activities, meals, and care. He said he had met Julia, who struggled to balance work with her son's schedule, and that he knew she wasn't the only one in that situation. Morris, who was present at the meeting, let out an ironic laugh. He said it was a waste of money, that the company was not a charity, that employees needed to solve their personal problems outside the workplace. He added that if they started making concessions like that, soon everyone would be asking for absurd benefits. Liam looked at Morris and for the first time felt something beyond intimidation. He felt indignation. He said, in a calm but firm voice, that his father built this company thinking about the people who worked in it. That a strong company wasn't one that squeezed everything out of its employees, but one that supported them, that made them want to give their best. He said that if taking care of people was a waste, then he didn't understand anything about real business. The silence that followed was profound. Some of the directors present glanced at each other, surprised by the maturity of those words coming from such a young boy. Morris turned red with anger, but couldn't counter-argue. Dr. Henry hid a smile and said they would conduct a feasibility study for the project. In the following days, the idea gained momentum. The Human Resources Director, Mrs. Regina, the same lady who had extended her hand to Liam on the first day, embraced the project with enthusiasm. She gathered data, talked to employees, organized numbers. She found that over 40% of the employees had young children, and many faced difficulties finding daycare or schools with hours compatible with their work. Liam followed everything closely. He visited potential spaces within the building, talked to educators about appropriate activities, and asked the employees themselves what they would like to see in that place. Each conversation made him understand more about the reality of the people who worked there. He met mothers who left home before their children woke up and returned when they were already asleep. He met fathers who had to pay exorbitant amounts for private daycare, compromising a large part of their salaries. He met grandparents who had given up their own routines to care for their grandchildren while their children worked. And it was in these conversations that Liam realized something fundamental. He realized he wasn't there to command or order. He was there to listen, to understand, to facilitate. The power he inherited was not to be used from the top down, but from the bottom up, building structures that supported people. Meanwhile, Morris was plotting behind the scenes. He knew he couldn't legally contest Liam's inheritance. The documents were too solid, but he could make things difficult, sabotage, create obstacles. He began to circulate among the directors, planting doubts about a child's ability to understand how a company works. He said that allowing Liam to make decisions was risking everything Robert had built, that in a few months the company would be bankrupt because of sentimental and naive projects. Some directors began to listen, not because they completely agreed with Morris, but because they were afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of change, afraid of the unknown. Morris was skilled at using this fear, at turning it into support for his ideas. He proposed the creation of an executive board with broad powers, one that could make decisions without needing the heir's approval until he turned 18. In practice, he wanted to take full control. Dr. Henry found out about the plan through a director who was loyal to Robert's memory. She approached the lawyer in private and told him about the secret meetings, the conversations in the hallways, about Morris's strategy. Dr. Henry thanked her for the information and decided it was time for Liam to know what he was really dealing with. He called Liam and Mary for a serious conversation in his office. He explained that Morris was trying to create a parallel power structure, that he was seeking support to take control of the company indirectly. He said that legally, he couldn't do it without authorization, but if he managed to convince the majority of the directors, he could make the situation very complicated. Liam listened in silence. He wasn't surprised. From the first day, he felt that Morris was a threat. But now the threat had a form, a strategy. He asked Dr. Henry what he could do. The lawyer said Liam had two options. He could wait, let Morris make his move, and then counterattack, legally, or he could act first, asserting his position clearly and publicly. Liam thought about the second option. He didn't want to start a war, but he also didn't want to be passive while someone tried to take from him what his father had left. He decided it was time to make his first official act as heir. It was time to show that, although he was young, he had conviction, and that he would honor Robert's legacy in every way possible. The next day, Liam called a general meeting with all employees. It was unprecedented in the company's history. Morris tried to cancel it, claiming it would disrupt work, but Liam was adamant. Dr. Henry supported him, saying that as the legal heir, Liam had that right. The meeting was scheduled for late afternoon in the main auditorium of the building. More than 200 people attended, filling every available seat. There was curiosity in the air, but also expectation. Everyone wanted to see what this 11-year-old boy had to say. Liam went on stage with Mary and Dr. Henry by his side. He was nervous, his hands were sweating, his heart was pounding. But when he looked at those people, when he saw the faces of Julia, Mr. Anthony, Camilla, and so many others he had met, he felt a strange calm. He felt he was doing the right thing. He began to speak. He said he knew that many there were surprised, confused, perhaps even suspicious, that it was strange to have a boy as the heir to such a large company. But he asked them to understand one thing. He wasn't there to take his father's place. No one could do that. He was there to honor what his father believed in. And his father believed that a company was made of people, not bricks and mortar. Liam told them about the conversations he'd had, the stories he'd heard, the difficulties he'd discovered. He said he understood the weight of being responsible for those lives, those jobs, those dreams. And that, although he was young, he wanted to do things differently. He wanted to build a company where people felt valued, respected, heard. And it was then that he announced his first official act. Starting that month, Hope Place would be created, a space within the company dedicated to employees' children. There would be qualified educators, educational activities, healthy meals, and all the necessary care. It would be a safe place where children could stay while their parents worked, at no additional cost to the employees. The silence that filled the auditorium was followed by applause. Timid at first, then growing until everyone was on their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Julia was crying openly, holding a colleague's hand. Mr. Anthony wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smiling proudly. Camilla shouted a thank you that echoed through the entire room. Morris, who was sitting in the front row, did not applaud. He sat there, arms crossed, his face grim, watching everything with an expression of disdain. But for the first time since it all began, Liam didn't feel afraid of him. He felt pity. Pity for a man who had so much but understood so little about what truly mattered. After the meeting, Liam was surrounded by employees who wanted to thank him, who wanted to share their stories, who simply wanted to shake the hand of the boy who had just changed their lives. Mary watched it all, her heart overflowing with pride. She saw a strength in her, some that she didn't know existed, a courage that came not from arrogance but from compassion. When they finally managed to leave the auditorium, it was already night. Dr. Henry walked them to their car and said he was impressed. He said Liam had something rare, something that couldn't be taught. He had empathy. And that, in the business world, was more valuable than any degree or experience. But he also warned them. He said that Morris would not give up easily, that Liam's act would probably enrage him even more, that they needed to be prepared for a reaction. Liam nodded but said nothing. He knew the battle wasn't over, perhaps it hadn't even truly begun, but he was willing to face whatever came his way, not out of pride, but because now he understood what was at stake. That night at home, Liam sat on the balcony with the notebook where he jotted down his ideas. He added new items to the list. He wanted to create a scholarship program for employees' children. He wanted to improve the company cafeteria, ensuring quality food for everyone. He wanted to establish flexible hours for parents with young children. Each item on the list represented a life that could be transformed, a family that could have a little more dignity. Mary appeared with 2 cups of tea and sat next to her son. She said she was proud, but also worried about the weight Liam carried on his shoulders, about the responsibilities that were not typical for his age. Liam smiled and said he was fine, that yes, it was difficult, sometimes scary. But he felt he was doing something important, something that went beyond himself. The next morning, when they arrived at the building, they were greeted with a surprise. At the main entrance, someone had put up a large banner with Liam's picture and the words, "Thank you for seeing us." There was no signature, but there were dozens of names handwritten around the photo. Names of employees, of people who wanted to show their gratitude. Liam was moved. He hadn't expected it. He hadn't done what he did for recognition. But knowing that his actions had touched so many lives, that they had made a concrete difference, was something that filled his heart in a way he had never experienced before. As they went up to Robert's office, Dr. Henry received a call. It was from the police. They informed him that they had concluded their investigation into the last safe Robert had mentioned. The safe was registered at a bank, in a private vault, and could only be accessed with the presence of Liam and an officer of the court. Inside there were documents related to sabotage attempts against Robert during his tenure, including the names of people who had tried to harm him. The police scheduled the opening of the safe for the next day. Dr. Henry explained to Liam that this could reveal difficult, perhaps even painful things. It could expose people he thought were allies, but it was necessary to know the truth. It was necessary to understand what Robert was fighting against and what Liam might have to fight against as well. Liam agreed. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of lies, of omission, of ignorance. If there were secrets buried, he wanted to unearth them. He wanted to know who was truly on his side and who was just pretending to be. That afternoon, Morris requested a private meeting with Dr. Henry. He said he was willing to negotiate, that he recognized Liam's rights, but he thought it was important to have professional management while the boy was a minor. He offered to take over as executive president with the power to make strategic decisions while Liam learned about the business. Dr. Henry listened with a neutral expression. When Morris finished, the lawyer said only one thing. He said that Liam was young, but he was not foolish, that he was learning fast, and that he had already shown more vision and humanity in a few weeks than many executives show in entire careers. He said there was no room for negotiations that involved diminishing Liam's role, and that if Morris wanted to stay with the company, he would have to accept the new reality. Morris stormed out of the room, slamming the door. Dr. Henry knew he had just made an even more determined enemy, but he also knew he couldn't give in. Not after seeing what Liam was capable of, not after seeing the hope he brought to those people. At the end of the day, Liam returned to Robert's office on the top floor. He liked that place, the view, the feeling of being close to his father in some way. He sat in the chair behind the desk, something that still felt strange, and looked out the window. The city was lit up, thousands of lights twinkling in the darkness. Each light represented a life, a story, a dream. He thought about the next day, about the safe that would be opened, the secrets that would be revealed. He thought about Morris and his attempts to take control. He thought about the employees who now saw him as a source of hope. And he thought about his father, Robert, the man he never knew, the man, but who had left a path laid out, full of clues, full of lessons. Liam took the watch from his wrist and placed it on the desk. He looked at the stopped hands, at the numbers on the dial. 3:22. He didn't know what that time meant, if it meant anything at all. But he decided that symbolically that was the moment everything changed, the moment Robert's time stopped and Liam's time began. And as the night deepened over New York, Liam made a silent promise. He promised he would live up to that trust, that he would protect that legacy, that he would take care of those people, not because he was obligated to, not because he had power, but because it was the right thing to do. And in the end, that's what mattered. Doing the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The next morning dawned overcast over New York. Liam woke with a knot in his stomach, a mix of anxiety and determination. Today was the day the last safe would be opened, the day Robert's deepest secrets would come to light. Mary prepared breakfast in silence. She too felt the weight of the moment. They knew that whatever was in that box could change everything again. They arrived at the bank shortly before 10 o'clock. It was a large branch in the city center, with security guards at the door and a formal, quiet atmosphere. Dr. Henry was already there, talking with a court officer and a police detective. When Liam and Mary arrived, everyone greeted each other politely but seriously. There was no room for smiles at that moment. They were led to a special room reserved for opening vaults in legal situations. It was a small room, with a table in the center and chairs around it. A bank employee brought the safe, a dark, heavy metal box, and placed it on the table. It had 2 locks, and Liam had the key to one of them. The other key was with the court officer, part of the security protocol established by Robert. Liam looked at the box and felt a shiver. Inside were truths someone had tried to hide, information that could destroy reputations, perhaps even reveal crimes. Robert wouldn't have done something like this without a very strong reason. He wasn't a vengeful man, but he was a man who valued justice. The court officer read a statement, explaining that everything found there would be documented and could be used as evidence if necessary. Liam nodded, showing he understood. Then, with trembling hands, he inserted his key into the first lock. The officer inserted the second. Together they turned the keys at the same time. The box emitted a click and the lid came loose. Inside were organized folders, each with a name handwritten on it. Liam recognized some of the names, company directors, people he had met in recent weeks. But the name that caught his attention the most, written on a thicker folder than the others, was Morris. Dr. Henry carefully picked up the folder and opened it. Inside were documents, printed emails, bank statements, photographs, and a USB drive. He connected the USB drive to the laptop he had brought and began to examine the files. As he read, his expression grew increasingly serious. The police detective moved closer and began reading along, taking notes in a notebook. What was in there was devastating. Morris, during the last 2 years of Robert's life, had been systematically trying to undermine his authority. He had embezzled company funds into personal accounts, manipulated contracts to favor companies in which he was a silent partner, and even tried to convince the directors to declare Robert mentally incompetent during his hospitalization to seize full control of the company. There were emails between Morris and Roderick, the former partner who had shown up days earlier, claiming a right to the inheritance. The two were working together. Roderick would be the front, filing a lawsuit claiming the inheritance should be divided, creating a legal crisis that would destabilize the company. Meanwhile, Morris would consolidate his internal power, presenting himself as the only stable leadership option. When everything settled, they would divide control of the company between them, leaving Liam with only scraps or, at best, forcing him to sell his share for much less than it was worth. But Robert had discovered the plan. He had a loyal ally, someone inside the company who had been monitoring Morris and reporting directly to him. This ally, whose name was protected in the documents, provided all the proof Robert needed. And before he left this world, Robert had organized everything meticulously, ensuring the truth would eventually come out. There was something even more disturbing. Morris had tried to hasten Robert's end. He had bribed a nurse at the hospital to administer incorrect doses of medication, hoping it would cause fatal complications. The nurse, however, had a change of heart and confessed everything to Robert days before he passed. Robert forgave her, asked her to leave the hospital and start over somewhere else, far from it all. And he recorded her confession on audio, storing it in that safe. Liam felt nauseous. He knew Morris was arrogant, knew he wanted power, but he never imagined he was capable of something so horrible, of trying to rush someone's end out of greed. Mary held her son's hand tightly. She too was shocked, with tears streaming down her face. The detective said this was serious, that it constituted attempted murder, in addition to fraud and corruption. He said Morris would be arrested that very day, that a warrant would be issued immediately. He also said that everyone involved would be investigated and held accountable. Dr. Henry looked at Liam and said he would understand if the boy wanted to go home, if he wanted to get away from it all for a while. But Liam shook his head. He said he wanted to be present when Morris was confronted. He wanted to look him in the eyes and know that the truth had won. He wanted to honor the courage of his father, who, even while ill, had the strength to protect his son and his company. They returned to the company building shortly after noon. The detective and 2 uniformed police officers accompanied them. The commotion caused a stir among the employees, who began to whisper in the hallways, trying to understand what was happening. Morris was in his office on the 14th floor when he was informed that the police wanted to speak with him. He came down to the meeting room with an arrogant smile on his face, as if this were just another situation he could easily control. But when he saw Liam, Mary, Dr. Henry, and the police officers, his smile faltered. When the detective began to present the evidence, his face went pale. He tried to deny it. He said it was a lie, a setup, that Robert was confused when he compiled that information. But the detective was relentless, showing document after document, audio after audio, proof after proof. There was no escape. There was no way to lie in the face of so much concrete evidence. When the audio of the nurse's confession was played, Morris shot up from his chair, red with rage. He shouted that Robert was a weakling, that he had wasted the company on sentimentality, that he, Morris, was the one who had truly built this empire. He said Liam was just a brat who deserved nothing, that Mary was an opportunist, and that everyone there was a fool for believing in the farce of this inheritance. Liam stood up and looked directly at Morris. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but carried a strength that surprised even himself. He said that Morris was right about one thing. He really was just a boy who never knew his father, who grew up watching his mother work to exhaustion to put food on the table. A boy who knew nothing about managing companies, about corporate strategies, about the business world. But he knew about something Morris would never understand. He knew about humanity, about looking at people and seeing more than employees or resources, about understanding that the true value of a company wasn't in its profits, but in the lives it sustained. And he knew that if honoring his father's memory meant facing people like Morris, then he would face them 1,000 times over. Because that's what decent people do. They don't run from evil, they stand up to it. The silence that filled the room was broken only by the sound of handcuffs being placed on Morris's wrists. He was escorted out of the building under the astonished gazes of all the employees. Some were shocked, others relieved, some even applauded discreetly as he passed. Morris's tyranny was over. And although the way it all ended was tragic, there was a sense of justice being served. In the days that followed, the company underwent an internal cleansing. Others involved in Morris's schemes were identified and dismissed. A full audit was conducted, and the embezzled funds began to be recovered. Dr. Henry, with the help of Mary and directors loyal to Robert, reorganized the command structure, establishing a management council that would run the company until Liam was old enough to take over fully. Mrs. Regina was appointed interim president. She was respected, fair, and had everyone's trust. Her first action was to accelerate the creation of Hope Place. In less than a month, the space was ready. It was an entire floor dedicated to children, with colorful rooms, educational toys, a small library, and even an outdoor play area. On opening day, dozens of employees brought their children to see the space, and tears of gratitude were visible on many faces. Liam cut the symbolic ribbon alongside his mother, Mrs. Regina, and Dr. Henry. He looked at the children running and playing, at the parents watching proudly, and felt that there lay the true inheritance Robert had left. It wasn't the building, not the bank accounts. It was the possibility to make a difference, to touch lives, to build a better future. Julia approached Liam that day, holding her 5-year-old son's hand. She said she had no words to thank him, that this space would completely change her life. She said she could now work in peace, knowing her son was safe, well cared for, learning and having fun. She said Liam was a blessing, not just for her, but for everyone there. Liam, moved, said that he was the one who should be thankful, because these people, with their stories, their struggles, their dignity, had taught him what really mattered in life. They taught him that success isn't measured in money but in smiles, in knowing that when your head hits the pillow at night, you did something good that day, something that made the world, even if just a little bit, better than it was when you woke up. Weeks later, when the dust finally began to settle, Liam returned to Robert's office on the top floor. He liked to go there from time to time, sit in the chair, look out the window, and have silent conversations with the father he never met. He would tell him about the things he was learning, the people he was meeting, the challenges he was facing. That day, as he watched the sunset paint the city in shades of orange and pink, he had a revelation. He finally understood what the time on the watch meant. 3:22. It was the time he was born. Mary confirmed it when he asked. Robert had stopped the watch at the exact moment his son came into the world. It was his way of saying that from that instant everything had changed, that his life had gained a new purpose, a new meaning. Tears streamed down Liam's face. He held the watch to his chest and whispered a thank you to his father. Thank you for not giving up, for leaving that path laid out, for believing he would be capable. And although Robert was no longer there to hear, Liam felt that somehow he knew. He knew his son was honoring his legacy. He knew the seed he had planted was growing, bearing fruit, spreading its shade. Mary entered the office silently and sat beside her son. She too was moved, looking at Liam with an overflowing pride. She said Robert would be proud, that he would see in him not just a son, but a man in the making, a good, fair, brave man. She said that although the journey had been difficult, every tear was worth it, because now they had not just financial security, but purpose. They had a reason to wake up every day and make a difference. Liam hugged his mother and said that none of this would have been possible without her, that it was she who raised him with values, with principles, with love, that it was she who taught him to look at people with compassion, not to judge by appearances, to always seek to understand before criticizing. He said the true legacy wasn't what Robert left, but what Mary built day after day with her calloused hands and her immense heart. Months passed. Hope Place became a benchmark. Other companies began to visit to understand the model and replicate it in their own businesses. Liam created the scholarship program, benefiting the children of employees who wanted to attend university. He implemented flexible hours for parents, improved the cafeteria, and established a free psychological support program for all employees. The company not only survived the changes, it thrived. The employees, feeling valued and respected, began to work with more dedication, more creativity, more passion. Turnover dropped drastically. Satisfaction soared. Financial results improved. And all of this proved something Robert had always known, but that the corporate world often forgot. Taking care of people was the best investment a company could make. Liam continued to attend school, but now he balanced his studies with visits to the company. He was still a boy, still played soccer with his friends, still watched cartoons on Saturday mornings, but he also carried a wisdom that few adults possessed. He understood that power was responsibility, that privilege required giving back, that receiving much meant giving even more. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Liam brought a group of friends from school to see the building. He showed them Hope Place, introduced some employees, and told the story of how it all began. His friends were impressed, asking questions, wanting to understand how a boy their age could be involved in something so big. Liam explained that it wasn't about size or age, it was about intention, about wanting to do good, about understanding that each of us, no matter how young or old, can make a difference, can change a life, can bring hope, can be a light for someone in the darkness, and that, if everyone did their part, the world would be a much better place. A year after that first day, Liam walked into the building. A special ceremony was organized. It was an event to celebrate the anniversary of Hope Place and to honor Robert. A plaque was installed at the entrance of the building, with Robert's name and a phrase Liam chose himself. The phrase read, "A company is built of bricks and mortar, but it is sustained by dreams and hearts." During the ceremony, Liam gave a speech. He spoke about the father he never met, but knew through his actions, his choices, his legacy. He spoke about Mary, the strongest woman he knew, the mother who taught him everything important in life. He spoke about every employee present, about how each of them was an essential part of this story, of this transformation. And he made a promise. He promised that when he was old enough to officially take over, he would continue on the path he had started, not out of obligation but out of conviction. Because this wasn't just Robert's legacy. It was the legacy of everyone who believed that a better world was possible. and he would be there, day after day, working to make that world a reality. The applause echoed through the lobby, tears were shed, hugs were exchanged, and when Liam looked around, he saw not just employees but family, a family he didn't choose, but that chose him, a family united not by blood but by purpose, by respect, by love. That night, back at home, Liam held the watch he now wore every day. The hands were still stopped at 3:22, and he decided he would never make them move again. Because that watch wasn't for marking the time that passed, but for remembering the time that began, the time of a new story, of a new path, of a new hope. Mary watched her son from the kitchen as she prepared dinner. She smiled to herself, remembering when Liam was just a baby in her arms, when she would wake up in the middle of the night to feed him, when she wondered how she would manage to raise a child alone. And now, looking at this boy who was becoming a man before her eyes, she knew she had managed, and she had done well. Liam got up from the balcony and went into the kitchen, hugged his mother from behind and said he loved her. Mary turned and held her son's face in her hands, looking deep into his eyes. She said it was she who loved him, that he was her greatest pride, her greatest achievement, that no matter how many buildings there were, how many zeros were in the bank accounts, what mattered was who he was, and he was good, he was fair, he was kind, he was everything she had ever dreamed he would be. They had dinner together, talking about their day, about future plans, about simple, everyday things, and in that simplicity, in that common moment of a mother and son sharing a meal, lay the greatest wealth that existed. There was love, there was family, there was the certainty that, no matter what came, they would be together. As the night wore on and Liam went to his room, he lay in bed looking at the ceiling. He thought about everything he had lived through, everything he had learned, everything he still had ahead of him. He thought of Robert and how he wished he could have known him, heard his stories, felt his hug. But he also understood that in a way he did know his father. He knew him through every person he had touched, through every wise decision he had made, through the love he had recorded in videos, letters, and actions. And as sleep came, Liam made one last silent promise. He promised he would live in a way that, when his story came to an end, he too would leave something of value. Not just money or property, but good memories, transformed lives, planted hope. He promised he would be the bridge between the past Robert built and the future yet to be written. And that, in doing so, he would honor not only his father but all those who believed in him when he was just a scared boy holding his mother's hand. New York slept outside, with its millions of lights, its millions of stories. And in a small apartment in Queens, a 12-year-old boy slept, clutching a stopped watch, dreaming of a tomorrow where everyone could have the chance to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. And in that dream, in that hope, in that promise, lay the true meaning of inheriting a legacy. It wasn't about receiving, but about passing on. It wasn't about keeping, but about sharing. It wasn't about power, but about serving. And so, with a peaceful heart and a clear purpose, Liam moved forward, no longer as the frightened boy who entered that immense building, but as the young man who understood that the greatest empire one can build is not made of concrete, but of love, justice, and compassion, and that this empire, unlike all others, never crumbles, because it is built on the strongest foundation that exists, the foundation of humanity. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Liam and Mary has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by the journey of this brave boy who transformed pain into purpose and inheritance into hope, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most, what lesson you take from this narrative for your own life. Every day we bring intense and emotional stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that make us reflect on our own legacies and on what truly matters in life. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too early or too late to make a difference. We'll be waiting for you tomorrow with a new story that will stir your emotions. Until then, and remember, the true legacy is not what we keep, but what we leave in people's hearts.